Alright, in this video we'll create a basic React.js application where you will see all these data in the form of card is actually coming from this JSON file. So the goal of this video is to understand the file structure and how to install React and how to create component and how to use props so that we can make this kind of layout where you'll be displaying the user details from JSON into this HTML. Cool. Now let me stop this server, Control C. Now we need to create a folder. So we don't need to create any folder. First of all, we'll install the React now with the help of Vite. So you have to run this code npm create Vite @latest. So I want my React folder on this folder which is React. So I have to get into that location. So now I'm in the particular location where I want my React.js to be installed. If I click on enter, it will ask for what is a project name that you're going to give. I'm going to name it as test2. Clicking enter. It says it's not empty. So cancel operation, remove existing file and continue. Now it's asking which framework you're going to use. We are going to use a React and the variant is JavaScript. And do you want to install npm and start now? I'm clicking on enter. I'll wait for some time so that Vite would be installing the React.js dependency on my test2 folder, and it says the application is running on this particular URL. So this is the welcome screen from Vite and React.js which we have just installed. Let me just open our folder. We have named it as test2. So all this information is actually coming from this index.css. Let me just delete it. I'll just delete all the unnecessary CSS and JS files so that we can start fresh. We don't need this public folder as well. Now we have app.css. We can remove this because we'll be using a custom CSS file, and we will be linking it with our component. So this is the HTML. This HTML what you see is actually coming from here. We don't want this, or else we just want a simple heading. Let's just have a simple heading called registered user, and let this be inside H1 or something. And let me just run our server. So we just need to make sure that we are in the proper folder, and it's not allowing me to type. Yeah, now we just have to type npm run dev so that we get our URL, and this is how it's showing up because we have deleted most of the file. So let me remove all the imported ones since we have deleted it. We don't need state. The counter is defined here, and over here we don't need this. Oh, app can be there. We don't need this. Now you should see a simple screen that is actually coming from. So let me see where it's coming from. We can name it as, instead of welcome to Vite, we can name it as registered user. Now this is a component where it's getting loaded. It's getting called on this component. So we have two components. This is the main component. This main component calls the app.js where we are loading our heading. So it's like component calling another component. Now over here you see main.jx has the app, and also now we'll be creating another component, and we can call it as cards. So let's create a component in the src folder. If you don't need assets, you can remove that as well so that we can start fresh. So as of now we have three files. You can remove this ESLint as well. So we, as of now, we are just playing with only three files: app.js, main.jsx, and index.html. So what you see here is actually index.html, and index.html has a div which is root. In this root, your main.jx would get loaded. So you can see we would be calling it with the help of JavaScript get element by id root, and in the root div place the components. As of now we have just one component. If you don't want, you can remove it. It's just does the work of displaying the heading. And let's create another component, and we can name this component as cards or user cards dot jsx. Since we are using white, jsx is important, or else you will get an error saying that if you are using jsx, your file name should be jsx. If you're not using white, you can just name it as .js. Now if you want, I'm going to call our user cards on this component. So here the rule is you have to use capital case so that your JS can understand that it's not HTML but a component. If you don't use it as a capital case, your React.js will think that it's an HTML element, but we want to differentiate as this is a component. That's why we are naming it as starting with capital letter. Now we want some kind of HTML in this place. So for that we'll be just typing export. We need to create a function, and we can name it as, you can name it the same as our file name, and we want to export it. The reason for exporting is whatever you write here would get exported, and it would get displayed over here. That's the reason why we are writing export. Now we need to return something, and this has to be a HTML. Let me just copy the HTML from the previously created one. Control U. We'll grab the HTML from here. Now it's just a static HTML. You will see a static HTML. You can't just directly paste the HTML over here because this is not an HTML file, it's a JSX file. The reason for naming it is because the class, when it comes to JavaScript has a keyword called class. You can't use that, so in place of class you have to use class name, camel case. And let's just see whether we are able to import it, because you won't be able to import it. The reason is, first of all, you have to import it over here, import, and then you'll see the HTML in action. The reason for importing is we know that we are exporting something with the help of this keyword, and what we are exporting is actually a JSX element, and now we are importing into this component so that we can use this component. Now let's add a CSS. So you can call it as style.css, and let's add the relevant CSS over here. So I've copied the CSS, I'm going to paste it over here. Now if you make a refresh, you should find a good amount of CSS. It won't work unless you link it again. So import, since we are in the same folder, you have to use dot slash. Now you see the CSS in action. So if you want to change the name, you have to do it manually. So let's say this is me, but I want to import it from JSON. So how are we going to do that? Now let's just import the JSON, user.json, users.json, and it will be just an object array. It will just an array with multiple objects inside it. So this is an array with multiple objects inside it. So for now, let me just display only one object, so that I'll make you explain how to import JSON value into the component. Now we are in the main component. Let's just import our JSON value, since we are in the same folder, users.json. Now we have to name it. We are exporting somewhere. We are not exporting, we are just calling it, and I would like to name it as, let's say, users. Now I'm going to send this as a prop. So data, since I'm passing JavaScript array, we have to use curly brace. Now we can access this data inside our component. Let me just close this. We can access this, and we'll use the object destructuring. Now in place of the value, I just have to call, and that's it. Now these data, what you see, actually it's not working. In the user, actually it was the key value. So we are passing we would be accessing the key. The problem is we are passing the value as users, but here we have to use the key. So when you use this key, you will see the proper data. So if I change, let's say, you should see UI monk. Now let's work on multiple objects in an array. The reason for I said destructuring is, you can use it in this way. Previously, this is how it was written, props. So you have to call this in this way, saying that props, then the key, then the key of this object. So now this would work. Now we would be using a concept called object destructuring. So in this case, you'll be passing data directly over here, which can replace all these values. Control H, and we can replace this, but this would still work. Now let's work on multiple objects in an array. Here the concept is, right now if you see, we are just displaying one value because we have passed the index as 0. Now I don't want this. I want to run a loop on this array so that the data would get properly displayed. Since we have multiple values, we would be using a loop here. So here we have a function called map. We will be running map on this particular object, and we would be returning this data, sorry, this component over here. Now you see we would be getting individual user, and also we would be passing index, and we have to give as key, it's mandatory. It looks like there's a syntactical error, let's face it. So this is how it should be: users dot map, then arrow operator, here you need to pass a return, and you have to pass index as well. Since we are returning JSX, it's recommended to use curly braces instead of round bracket. That's the reason it was throwing an error. Now you should see the list. The CSS, we just have to modify the CSS. I'm just making a cheat, so I'm going to use float and going to give margin, so 10 pixel. We won't be using float. Float is a very old technology, but to make it look better, the focus is on React.js. That's why I'm sticking float left to the CSS. Now we have made this React application that is actually fetching the data from the JSON, and with the help of component we are rendering the HTML once. And since we have multiple objects inside an array, we are using the map function of React.js. Now if you want an ID for each card, what you have to do is you have to pass another value, let's say ID, and you need to pass index. You might be thinking there is already key you are passing, so why separately index? So when it comes to map function, this key is actually no use for us, but React.js will use it internally. So we won't be able to access this key, but we'll be able to access this ID. Let's access this and give it. So let's say ID, we can give ID, but most important is we need to call it over here, send it as an argument so that we can access it in the JSX. Now you see each of them, each of the div gets the ID. If I show you, I don't want to show you, it won't work. Cool. So this is how we implement the array that is coming from JSON and display it in the form of card. Meet you tomorrow, the other day, with another React.js tutorial.